The interesting thing about being in the human form is that the human form is one that shows we are ready to ascend our consciousness. A lot of times we go, oh, Michael's the best. Oh, being Syrian, you know, like Sirius, the planet, like, or being Pleiadian. And I love Pleiadians. We think that all of these other things, whether they're from old age, biblical contexts that have carried over into the new age, or even the things that we're aware of now, are the peak. But really, once we're done playing the right hand of God, once we're done playing certain themes out, we come into the human experience to shed them, to truly ascend them. The higher self is Source wearing a Halloween mask. Okay. Because remember how you were talking earlier about the fractal nature of reality, how it goes lower and lower and lower? The higher self is Source, but if we want to get really technical, the higher self is Source, but with more of a own unique intrinsic nature, own unique personality. And I don't mean the conditioned persona. I don't mean a conditioned personality. I mean the personality of spirit, which is just the intrinsic attributes. So once we start going down and fractalizing, we start becoming more unique and more personable to its own journeys. And so the higher self still is Source. It's just wearing a Halloween costume and mask. One of the things I learned from that was service to self is ruled 1000% by hubris. You know the Greek term hubris for the arrogance of a consciousness? They're hubris incarnate. They can only see what they want to see. That's what makes well-intended, very innocent, spiritual awakening people actually a match to service to self. It's only being able to see what you want to see.
Welcome, everyone. So today we have an interview with Sarah Elkhaldy, better known as The Alchemist. And she has a YouTube channel called The Alchemist with something like, 150 videos or something, focusing on topics like metaphysics, esoteric teachings, spirituality. So some of my favorite subjects. And I've been watching her content for a while, reached out to her, and she agreed to appear on my show. We obviously, if you have two people who are serious into these types of topics, you can expect that the conversation goes pretty deep, let's say. This interview is definitely for people who want to explore deeper concepts in spirituality or metaphysics. So some of the topics that we discussed include things like, what is the higher self? How many densities or dimensions do we have? Was Jesus a real historical figure? Who was Jesus? What about angels and archangels? Michael, Metatron, Gabriel. Service to self path. Do you have to repay karma, let's say? And another interesting topic was backdrop people. Apparently, there are people who don't have souls. I heard about this concept a couple of months ago and I saw Sarah covering it in her videos, so I decided to ask her about it. So quite a lot of really deep esoteric concepts. So I hope you're gonna enjoy it if you're a true truth seeker. And before we're gonna get into the interview, I want to make a quick announcement. So if you don't know, or you might know, my online course called Exit the Matrix is live now. You can check it out at truetheory.com/academy. And it's a personal development course with over 30 modules, bonus content such as guided meditation and some other exercises. And this online course helps people to transform their lives and figure out what is blocking us from reaching our goals. So currently I'm still offering it at half price. So you can get it for as little as $60. All you have to do is go to truetheory.com/academy and use the coupon code Black Friday together at the checkout, and you get the access to the course. And to be honest, this is an amazing offer, and the guided meditation is probably worth $50 alone or something. So you get 30 modules plus guided meditation, some other exercises for very, very little money. So have a look at truetheory.com/academy and use the coupon code Black Friday together at the checkout and get access to my online course for half price. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, this is Sarah Elkhaldy. Okay, this is Mike Sigula from truetheory.com, and this is True Theory Podcast. And my guest today is Sarah Elkhaldy, also known as the Alchemist. Sarah is a spiritual teacher and energy healer. She is trained in both shamanic and quantum healing modalities that she combines from all her years of experience in order to address all layers of the client's energy field. One of her greatest joys is her helping facilitate her clients' transformation into their higher selves. In addition to her healing practice, Sarah is an international speaker who hosts live events, retreats, and seminars in Alchemy, Ascension, and shadow work. Sarah is also a YouTuber with over 8 million views on her YouTube channel, and her YouTube channel is called The Alchemist. You can check it out. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Hope I'm pronouncing your surname correctly.
Yeah, you've been the closest so far. So,
is it American surname?
It's Libyan. It actually,
Oh, wow. Okay.
it was actually changed when my dad came over here. And so it actually is supposed to be A-L-L, which means the tribe, like whatever tribe, and then Haldi, which means eternity. So it's the eternity, Elkhaldy.
So you have some symbolism in your name already,
Right.
kind of built in. Yeah. So I've been checking some of your content for a while, and a lot of your ideas resonate, and kind of that's why, I felt like maybe you would like to share a little bit about your journey with some of our followers. Could you tell us a little bit how you got into where you are now, and what was your awakening process like, let's say? And you have some kind of psychic abilities as well. Was it developed overnight or from childhood? And just kind of interested to understand your journey through this lens of spiritual awakening and your abilities and things like that.
Yeah, so I go by claircognizant just because I find it a little tacky when people say, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, and this, and that. It's like, just wrap it up. Just so I say claircognizance. I'm clairsentient. I have clairvoyant abilities, but I don't rely on them as much. And I notice them to also not be reliable as much. And so claircognizance is my main go-to. So for my psychic capabilities, I have always been claircognizant, and it wasn't until a nervous system injury that I incurred in 2018 that everything became very more enhanced, amplified, way more intense, way more clear. So there was definitely a developmental curve, I would say. And the greatest impact upon a person's own abilities, whatever they may be, is how strong of a bandwidth, how broad of a bandwidth they have, as well as discernment. That will allow a person who has any abilities or who seeks to activate their dormant abilities to have those come in a strong and clear way. It's a person's own ability to discern. Otherwise, you could see things, but you're interacting with your own projections, you're interacting with your own mental thought forms, and that's not true psychicness.
Yeah, this is a big challenge. How do you know if maybe you're channeling some kind of, even like some negative being or something like that, right? Do you have some methods to recognize if there is someone trying to hijack, your ability sometimes? Can you sense, or do you have some methods to know if this is like genuine?
So all of this kind of depends on a few factors. For instance, in the mind, anything goes. You could get clear information, you could not get it, you could have conflicting, whatever have you. There's so much stuff that goes on at the mental level. I always tell people, if a person wants to be able to access their own natural abilities, I view them as a natural right. I don't view them necessarily as super special, even though people have those talented abilities. I don't view them as being confined. And so because of that, it depends on an open heart, because so many different things can go on at the level of the mind. But in the heart space, to get into the heart space in the first place, you would already be cutting out 70% of the interference that you would run into in the mind level. So you can still be interfered with while you're opening your heart, but it cuts out so much of the crap that takes place in the mind. So the heart space is the most key feature and factor that needs to be opened, awakened when it comes to this. So that alone will have, because even if a being is trying to manipulate your channel, your conduit, if you're in the heart space, even if they got to that point of manipulation, they tapped in and distorted and distorted and distorted their frequency, their energy signature enough to get into that space. Now you have an open heart. So your discernment can even tell that. Does this make sense?
So do you have like some specific methods to kind of tune into the heart center, or, is it naturally intuitive, or you have some technique for that or something?
Many people who are even interested in awakening or going through awakenings already came in with their heart open to a certain degree. I came in with a heart fully open. I couldn't close it if I wanted to. Okay. But if a person wants to start developing that ability stronger, I don't want to say starting from scratch. I don't want the viewer to think that they're starting from scratch. But if they want to strengthen and develop that ability, then what they can do is look at empathy as a literal, visceral experience of oneness. It's not just like, oh my God, I'm embarrassed because I feel, typically we see the weaknesses in empaths or empathy. We don't technically see it as already being an advanced feature of our mind, body, spirit. And that's what it is. It's the visceral experience of oneness. Yeah.
I think about also when you're empathic, it's like training the heart center like a muscle, right? Because you are in this open state, right? So the more you are at this level, let's say, or you resonate at the level of this type of vibration, the more you're tuning into the feeling, right? And that kind of naturally is almost like training your muscles. You train the feeling. Would you agree with that? Because the opposite would be, for example, stress or anger or whatever, which is chaotic, right? So you're kind of shutting yourself down. What do you think about it? I feel like people who have empathy or, love, kindness, they are more sensitive in general. Like, for example, I had my upgrade, let's say, around 15 years ago. I had this Kundalini awakening, something like that, and I became way more, I became sensitive to energies overnight. I could feel like different types of energies, trees and things like that. But my mother, she has, I think it's also was connected with maybe something like I inherited in genes or something, because she has so much love that I don't know too many people like that. So I think it was just like already within me, and there was a trigger, maybe a little bit like your experience you described in 2018 or something, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So the empathy, like having that ability to tune in to another, is really higher intelligence if you think about it. It's almost like I'll make this way more comprehensible in layman's terms. Have you ever heard of the saying "read the room"?
I'm not sure, but I guess you sense the energies of people, something like that, when you are just
Yeah.
entering.
Well, I don't know. It might not be an international phrase, but here in the States, we go like "read the room," and that's kind of like a layman's term of being like, hello, you're not connected with what's going on around you with your audience. Like you're kind of just operating separated from what's going on. So you can't really tell if other people are uncomfortable or other people's experience. And so read the room is kind of like a funny way of somebody saying, wow, that's really a person out of touch, out of balance, out of attunement with what's going on in their environment around them. And so the opposite of that would be the empathic honing in of another person's experience. And that's higher intelligence. Empathy is the sensation of that. But that sensation doesn't just go on as a visceral sensation. It also can be a mental sensation. It's just not feeling like that. It's more just seeing another person's path opposite of yours, separate from your own journey, seeing another person's journey or wherever they're at. And so that would be that open heart space. That would be the gateway into that open heart space, is understanding another person's experience.
Okay.
It would be reading a room.
All right. What about like your experiences earlier on? So was it always like you had these types of interests into spirituality and paranormal and these types of subjects? When did it start for you?
So I grew up in a Catholic and Muslim household. So I would go to the mosque with my dad, and then I'd go to Sunday's Catholic church on my mom's side. And I had a bias towards Catholicism. I had a strong connection to not just their Gothic art, but the tone, the drama. I love the drama of it. And I'm somebody who's very sincere, meaning no matter how much drama, no matter how compelling it is, if I don't feel it, I don't feel it. And I was placed with a choice. Do I fake it? Do I fake that this feels good and just go down this path? Or do I just admit that this is not, what's going on is not whatever they think it is, as God. And so that broke me out. I just became on my own naturally disillusioned by it, but I had nothing to really fill its place. And so I started going down less of a spiritual road and less of a religious road, and just interested more from a philosophical lens, more about things that are very deep, very existential, but coming from it more from a lover of wisdom rather than putting on it any sort of religious dogma. And all of that, interestingly enough, is what led a journey into spirituality. It's hard for you to follow true logic and not run into intuition. That's the beauty of the paradox, is that the more logical you become, the more it doesn't oppose wisdom or spirituality or esoterica. That's why I love esoteric knowledge and I love esoterica. It's because it's literally, once you get to that point of logic and wisdom, you start seeing that, oh, there's a whole science and it's called esoterica. They already knew it. So I started getting into mysticism through philosophy first. Philosophy was the doorway into mysticism. Now, a part of my journey that I don't really talk about, and it's just because it hasn't come up, but I hear the question in what you've asked, is after 9/11, if you follow logic, this isn't about beliefs, this isn't about whatever. If you just follow logic, you will naturally come to a truth there. It might not be the deepest truth, but you will have to face a truth. And that truth is, there is something sinister happening behind the scenes. So that was a key point in my own awakening, because I had already known things of an existential, metaphysical, dark forces nature. But this became more in a very realistic manner and a realistic tone, shifting me into the fringe. So I went from philosophy into mysticism, but from mysticism, I went into the fringe. And I think you live in fringe. So I think you know what I'm talking about with fringe.
You mean like conspiracy, more kind of these types of topics?
Although I don't like that term because it's derogatory. Yes, that's what fringe is. And so that started getting mixed in, and I got myself involved with a cult that was very much against the negative alien agendas. And I learned a lot. I learned so much from that cult until I just grew out of it and I realized that this was really culty dynamics. So I left. That was hard enough. But yeah, there was a heavy emphasis on negative alien agenda, material, knowledge, information. And I found that very valuable, but that did get me in a lot of trouble with the forces within the nature, because when you awaken to those forces, they awaken to you. They know you know.
Yeah, can you tell me a little bit more about it? Because so you became more interested in the dark side, let's say, started digging, and then they became interested in you.
That's just what happens. It's that beautiful quote, and I forget who says it. It's some philosopher. He says, once you stare into the abyss stares at you.
Yeah, that sounds a little bit like my story. You know, I've been also oscillating between a lot of dark things, and then I got myself in a lot of trouble because of that. But that's how I understood how they operate as well. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of these experiences, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and you know what? This kind of ties in with what you were asking earlier about the heart and channeling. So this is a beautiful order that's been created here, because what I learned from that call, many things. Too much for even me to now look back and say it was a bad experience. Although at the time I would say that, yeah, that was a really rough experience. I learned too much for me to really be resentful. But looking back, there was so much focus on negative aliens that the dynamics flipped, and they actually started taking on a lot of what they were against. And they started accidentally losing their own light and shifting more towards a negative polarity. And it was completely by innocent accident. But I noticed that, and I knew that they weren't going to be open to that. So I just quietly tried to navigate my way outside of that group. But one thing that I find very interesting about that time, other than the fact that I was being regularly interacted with by negative beings who were observing me. So that was its own little hell stressor, because I was trying to figure out what was going on. Other people weren't having the same experiences as me. So I was being very much interacted with. and I didn't want to be. So I had to start. I was forced by that alone to just start understanding about inner work, how to heal from soul loss, how to heal from all these things. Inner child work, super strong. I got into fourth way teachings by Gurdjieff. I got into a lot of different aspects of mysticism that don't go by the term healing, but they're healing. And I did that specifically because there was a huge motivation to stop being interacted with and to figure out how to stop being interacted with. So that's how I learned shamanism. That's how I learned. That's why I have so many. I cannot take that away from my path, because that was my path. It was motivated by not being interacted with by native aliens that I learned all these other things. And I'm a very strong believer in fourth way inner work to this day because of that. But one thing that I think you might find interesting is that what I noticed when it comes to people who are interested in channeling outside of their own intuition is that conduit, that channel can get easily hijacked, and nobody will be able to tell that it's hijacked, even from the dark forces that they are concerned with overcoming. And how that can get hijacked, it happens incrementally. Have you ever been to the gym and you see the increment weights?
Yeah.
It never happens, and this is what people miss. It will never happen where you put a full 10-pound weight down on a piece of gym equipment and then you put a 30-pound. Channeling, how a channel gets distorted is through those increments of, I'm going to put a 1 pound. I'm going to put a 2 pound. Okay, now I'm going to wait. Okay, I've waited long enough. Now I'm going to put another 1 pound. Do you see that incremental shift?
You know, I started learning some methods over the last year where basically psychic would, for example, these methods were based around removing contracts or some kind of implants and things like that from your auric field. But what was interesting was that the psychic would, if there would be an entity or contract linked to some entity, because it's always based on client's free will somehow, right? The psychic could use that against the entity, so they would freeze the entity because it's kind of linked to the client's free will, and then they could reveal their true identity, because that was also aspect of free will. And this was really interesting, because every time when there would be entity that would appear as some kind of light being or something, they could actually look at who that entity really was. So this is like completely unknown method, and I had it blown me away because I had some implants and they removed them and I could feel it. So I became interested in that. But I noticed that they seem to have these methods. I still don't fully understand it but there is something about that. If the entity is interacting with you, so for example, you want to channel someone outside and someone is hijacking it, because it's your free will, you can request the true form of this entity or something like that, and they need to obey. So I don't know if you ever heard about anything like that.
Oh yeah, that's how my shaman discovered demons masquerading as angels, because she's highly clairvoyant. But the channel that I'm specifically talking about around that group, they weren't doing it through any clairvoyance. They were doing it through some form of written channeling. I think even at one point they were doing it through a Ouija board or something. So with that, when there was no visual information at all put into the picture, Yeah, but I know what you're talking about. That's absolutely how many different channelers use that test. They use that as a filter where they say, within my they make up a phrase, and there can be a phrase given to somebody, but also if a person uses their own sovereignty to create a phrase, that's just as strong, if not stronger. So they create some form of way of telling a being to reveal their true form, and that being has to. The only thing that they can do at that point is try to trick you out of even knowing you have the power to ask that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about higher self, because I basically, this is one of the big topics for me. And I had my experiences where I became my higher self on psychedelics. A couple of times. It was a very powerful experience where I could, like my life on earth would seem like 3 hours has passed and I was 30. And I could see all of reality from that level. So it's like waking up in bed from a dream for a moment. So I had a lot of these experiences. Even my higher self kind of gave me the name to call him and things like that. And I always try to teach others to tune into their higher selves, or to not pray to any deities, any religious figures, but you always want to work with your higher self, because this is where, all the important information is, right? So can you tell us a little bit, how do you see higher self? Some definition. Some people say that higher self is like you from whatever 7th, 8th density or something like that. What do you think about that? And one thing, because like I remember we used to do channelings of my higher self with my twin flame, let's say, and we asked about the density. I think he said 7th or 8th density at that time. And I heard that something like, once you become fully balanced between love and wisdom, when you go through the evolution, you become your higher self, right? When you become fully balanced. But then in a way, you work as your own spirit guide to all your previous incarnations or something like that, right?
That would be the higher self.
Yeah. So this is, but I have always problems with understanding like what was before, let's say, right? Because if you work, you try to help your previous incarnations, and I'm at the previous incarnation, that means that I already went through that, right? Because before you became the higher self, who was helping the previous incarnations? Do you know?
I understand the question.
The challenge I have with understanding the way this is going.
This is a very good question, and this is a very high level teaching. So this is kind of like what we would need to understand at a certain point. Simultaneity. That's the truth underlying everything. So right now we're in a truth, but we're in the truth of an unfolding, right? We're in a becoming. But at a certain level, what happens is everything already has all those potentials contained within it. There's a simultaneity. Now, once we enter a linear story, we get linear results. But those linear results are just showing us everything from a linear point of view. And that's true, but there's a higher truth. And that higher truth is that all those things already existed. And they were occurring simultaneously. So once we go into an experience like this, all of a sudden, now we get a whole story played out where we are a future self, where we're a past self, where we came from a point in time, where we're going to a point in time, where there's already a higher self who's figured all of it out and can help us and can guide us. All of that's happening when we enter linear time. Outside of linear time, outside of this density, you go higher, you're higher. I absolutely agree with the density range that you were talking about for being where the higher self coexists or exists. I agree with that bandwidth, that density. And at that level, beyond that level, there's no need for the higher self. The higher self doesn't even become an aspect of the body, mind, spirit until you get to a certain point where now there was, a past existed. Well, if a past existed, then that meant that a future existed. And if a future existed, that means there's a higher self who already has everything that figured it out. Does this make sense?
I mean, this is the big thing I've been trying to understand for many years. I always have problems with, because here, obviously, we think in linear terms, a lot of people say that you don't really have past lives, you have parallel lives or something. But, a lot of what I've been learning about my past lives, let's say, is through psychedelics, because with psychedelics, I could reach a lot of, through the higher self, I could enter into bodies that I had in the past and, see reality, things like that a lot. So sometimes, for example, I remember, I asked a question about my twin flame, how many times we incarnated together, and the answer came thousands, and I felt like, okay, so technically at this level here, I already had thousands of lifetimes, but all the lifetimes exist simultaneously in a way. So, it doesn't mean that all the future lifetimes, I already experienced them. They are somewhere in my memory or something. It's always like, for me, this is something I'm struggling to comprehend fully, how this stuff works.
I think what would be helpful is to know that, in my Starseed video, I talk about this. I talk about how there are higher density beings who have an intention to help raise the collective consciousness. So they incarnated into a human life. But then that naturally, if I say that naturally begs the question, does that mean that all of us aren't higher density? Which is a great and valid question. So then the only difference then between, if we're all from source, if we're all these powerful, sovereign, eternal beings, then what makes some higher density beings, who we call starseeds in this age, who have been called angels in past ages or rishis, now all of a sudden more special than other people? And so how I perceive it is that it just depends on how attached on the karmic wheel that a consciousness is. It doesn't mean they're less. It doesn't mean that they're less source consciousness. But what it does mean is that you can be a higher density being who chooses to incarnate into an experience, or you could have so many life cycles in the earth life system that you could be more earthbound of a consciousness. But here's the wildly quantum thing. Let's say that a being who is more identified in their third dimensional consciousness, who considers themselves only human and human alone, they're not a starseed, they're not this, they're not that, they're just human. If that being started to awaken their consciousness more and more, all of a sudden, they would have these different lifetimes on these different systems, these different constellations. Oh, they were part in Orion. Oh, they were this. Oh, they were that. Instantly, because the quantum accommodates every single future possibility of that thing. So that means that that's why some people say we're all ascended masters walking around Earth in amnesia. Technically, that's true at a certain level of reality, because at a certain level of reality, as soon as a being awakens to a certain degree, you don't have to be enlightened, but let's say a being starts awakening. There's already a future outcome of that, I see in the quantums, some higher selves are more full. They're more multidimensional. They're more developed. Not all higher selves even appear the same. But the more that a being awakens, guess what? Their higher self looks more full, looks more multidimensional, looks more developed. So the things we're doing now is like a feedback loop. Everything's like a feedback loop, so that even if a person's just human and they're human alone, and now they're going through an awakening, there's so many different future things that are now interacting with the present moment. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, no. There are so many things that get pretty complex. When we are actually entering this type of range of subjects, I forgot what was it called. Let me check. But basically, backdrop people. I think I saw it in one of your videos, and I heard about it from other people. And this is the topic that I just discovered a couple of months ago. So I started analyzing it. So the idea is that basically many people don't have souls, right? And they are more like, if you play a video game and you have something going on moving in the background, this is the kind of the scenery in our existence, right? And I wonder, okay, what if you're gonna do past life regression with such person? Would they remember past lives or something like that? Can you tell us a little bit about this concept? Yeah. So you have the definition of background characters perfect. It's what you said. The only thing I could add to that before we move on is, have you ever played a video game? Like my reference point would be this Pokemon Game Boy game that I played when I was young. Mm-hmm. And my character would have to go up and ask a character a question. And so they go, oh, you go to the mountain. And then after you interact with them, they go back to whatever the fake thing they were doing. Their only purpose was to serve to say that thing. It was very automated. They didn't have a life outside of that one thing, which was to say, you go to the mountain. And so that's the only way I would further add to what you already said about backdrop characters. It would be something that fills in the space between real live beings. So whether that's at a stadium, being people that cheer to make everything feel more real, or whether that's a person you're passing by on the street and you ask for directions and they tell you, you go to that mountain. But then if you ask them a deeper question, kind of like, where do you live? What was your third grade teacher's name? They won't be able to give you a response, because their only purpose was to serve as a background character to say, you go to that mountain. So that is the backdrop character's definition. It's energy that's just placed there to enhance real souls' abilities for learning. Now, I don't agree with that concept, but what I learned from making that video was that people don't have an attention span, because in order for me to talk about a concept, you first have to describe what that concept is. And many people got so angry when I was explaining what that concept is that they didn't even understand that I was explaining the concept before I give my opinion. So that's one thing. Our attention spans are creating very buzzword type. You get like 30 seconds to say something, and if you don't say the right things in that, then you're whatever. So that's something that's odd. But anyways, how I view this, I don't believe in backdrop characters. I believe that the soul is in different levels of development, and that, yeah, I don't believe we all have the same level of development of souls. I view it more through the Gnostic lens. In Gnosticism, they have these different categories. And we see spin-offs of this in other forms of mysticism, where they give titles and terms to different levels of development as well. But I'll just stick to Gnosticism because that seems to be the strongest and most popular way of using this. And I say that, and it's 144 right now, so that's my confirmation. So how in Gnosticism, there's the Hylics. And those would be ones that have such strong material consciousness that they haven't developed anything outside of that. So that would be the lowest quality of soul development. And then you have the psychics. And those are the ones that are the in-between. They have a more developed soul, but it's not at like a fully spiritually realized level yet. And then you have the third class, which is the pneumatics, from pneuma, meaning spirit. And those are the ones that can see what others can't see. So Da Vinci also summed this up to those who see when shown, and those who do not see. So I combine those two different teachings into one. I combine Da Vinci's categories because I find that quote to be very relevant and esoteric with Gnosticism's 3 types, and those would perfectly fit. Pneumatics would be able to see. The psychics, they can see, but they'd have to see when shown. You'd have to help them out. They're open, but you'd have to do some work. And then those who don't see, and it doesn't matter, no matter what you do, they will not see because that's not their dharma in this lifetime. They still have purpose. They still have soul. They still have their own journey. But if you're asking them to be those who see, that will not happen.
But do you believe that there are people, let's say, that have no soul?
I don't believe that they don't have a soul simply because to be in the human form in the first place means you have a little bit of soul. I'm talking about like at the very least. So to be in the human form, it consists of soul. But what happens is you can devolve your consciousness so much that you won't be able to take a human form in the next carnation.
Yeah.
So that's what people don't understand. People like to apply a higher truth that we're all one into another layer of reality, into this truth here, which is that there are such a thing as evolving and devolving, and that you can devolve, and that at a certain point, if you devolve so much, you will not be able to take a human form. You can become a part of the elementals. You can become a part of the lower astral. You can take different forms, but you can't take human form.
But do you mean if you become, let's say, service yourself to extreme, you can only use bodies that resonate with service yourself path, like reptilian or something?
Yeah, that too. So so that would be the opposite way. So you could graduate. If we're looking at that from an evolutionary pathway, you could graduate further into service to self, and that graduation would lead you to going down that pathway of being reptilian. I say that, and not even all reptilians are being the negative polarity that we're seeing. But yes, you can graduate into reptilian, but you can also devolve into like a mechanical astral being that we would look at more like gnomes, elementals.
But what's the difference between like, let's say graduating as service to self and devolving?
This is the perfect question. Because there's many people that are devolving, but that doesn't mean that they're polarizing to service to self. And you caught that nuance right now. let's use a psychopath, for example. Now, in mysticism, we believe that there is such a thing as being unredeemable, and that's what we would call psychopathy. If we go to sociopaths, yeah, you could work with that. That's redeemable. But let's just say that we're only focused on psychopathy right now. Psychopathy would be at a higher choice to come in completely disconnected with no ability to connect this life. So at that point, if you follow that path, if you become super service to self down that path, it would naturally lead you to its progression. And its progression at that point would be what we would consider hyperdimensional negative aliens, entities, whatever have you. But now let's not use such an extreme example. Let's use your everyday person who is listening to the news, eating junk food, never creates their own critical thinking. They're a part of a hive mind mentality. Even if they think they're sovereign, everything at this level is what mysticism calls automated. You're a robot. Even if you believe something that might be true, it didn't come from you. You're a part of a hive mind. So even if you're right, you're not right for the right reasons. You're right for the wrong reasons, and that still counts as not being right. So if you're just connected to the hive mind mentality, you don't think for yourself, you have all these different belief systems, programs, dogmas, all these things on top of your body, mind, spirit, what is left that will incarnate? There was nothing true that can carry on. You can't continue that human evolutionary trajectory. So you will naturally go into such a state of dissonance, right? If we're not creating awareness, we fall into the shadow, which is cognitive dissonance. You can become so dissonant that you fragment and fragment until you devolve. But do you see how that isn't, you were so service to self that you graduated into reptilian? Do you see the difference?
Yeah, but that would also happen after a couple of incarnations, you mean?
Yeah.
Typically?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I don't want to make it sound like everything, like even this lifetime that we're in was lifetimes in the works. So I don't want to make it sound like, hey, you don't agree with me? Guess what? You're going to be a gnome. I just want to show that if we're looking at it like a graph, that downward trajectory or that upward trajectory. And that downward trajectory, yeah, you can fragment enough to where you won't be able to take a human form because the human consciousness is on a certain pathway. But to be in that state in the first place, that depends on what was happening before this lifetime. So, yeah.
Okay. What about densities? So, I was also shown densities when I was doing my plant medicine sessions. And I would be shown 12 densities. And it was like a review of every density where my perception would shift. So I would see actually how the being sees at the different density level. So every time it was like jumping higher, 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 higher. And then I would get a review of like different worlds, different races, different symbols they use and things like that. And every time my perception would increase, so I could see more details simultaneously and things like that. And when I got to, I think, I didn't count it properly because it was very fast, but I believe it was 9th density. Everything changed. So before I would get a review of a little bit of everything, so different worlds, different races, different things. And at some point, I got to a place which looked like heaven, let's say. So it was kind of white with pillars, golden symbols. I think it was like a level of archangels. And then there were, I think it was 12 in total, if I counted correctly. And then there was something about the source. So source having a form and had an assistant or assistance. But that's kind of how much I remember from it. What's your view about densities? How many densities do we have, and what's going on, let's say, above higher self levels?
So I see them as being 12 densities. Now, that is in direct conflict with with the law of one material. I believe law of one says 7 densities. I'm fine with that. A lot of people don't even call them densities. A lot of people just call them all dimensions. I see them as densities, and I see them as being 12. What I've noticed is that when it comes to looking at things of this multidimensional reality, that we're not all going to see things through the same paradigm. So sometimes people break it up to saying, no, there are dimensions and there's 9, or no, there's 10. And I've heard a very compelling argument as to why it's dimensions and there's 10. And they broke it down through mysticism systems and all that. I see 12, and I see them as densities. So I don't get too hung up on the different numbers of it and the different ways that systems are conveyed. But as 12 densities that I perceive in this reality of light, I don't actually see source as being a human form. But I also get this. I see us all existing outside of light. So even what we're calling source, sometimes, not all the time, sometimes what we're calling source is the universal consciousness collaboration of oneness that is expressing itself as light. But if there's something beyond light, that's what I call source. But a lot of times people are talking about source from this layer that I just mentioned. Does this make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even remember like the form or anything. I just remember bits from these experiences. So what kind of form was it? Humanoid or something? I'm not sure. But do you know like what's going on? Because to me, like the way I see why it's also 12 makes sense to me, because it's like 4, 4, 4, right? So you have dualistic aspects, which is 4 and 4. And then we always have polarities like twin flames or plus minus. So first 4 is your kind of childhood period, let's say, when we are entering into adulthood now, where you decide you want to be service to self or not, or to others. And then you have final 4 after the higher self, which is like the management, let's call it. So the guys who are like keeping an eye if all the laws are, followed properly and all these things, right? So that's why, and this, everything is fractal, so you can see it. For example, if you look at, let's say neutron, proton, and electron, right? There is like 2 are opposites and 1 is assisting. There's always this assisting aspect. So sometimes you have like twin flames, and then there is a third person that is also in that group that is assisting one of these twin flames or something like that. So in a way, everything is not dualistic, but actually has 3. Like you have
completely agree.
2 eyes and the third eye, right? So this is why, fractally, it actually makes sense that you have 4 densities that are for the management, let's call it like archangels or whatever. What do you think happens with these 4? Do you think they're occupied by some entities, or something different?
Yeah. At every layer, there are the denizens. That would be the citizens of that density, the denizens. So that's the native consciousness of that density and those experiences, those forms. So I'm not saying that they can't be different, but it would be all accessed within that bandwidth. And if you're in that bandwidth, you would be like a citizen of that level of consciousness and would take a form that represents that in some way, which is interesting why in this third density, you could tell a lot about this level, a lot about this layer of reality by how many different types of forms it can take. But yes, so if you're talking about the first section of that fractal that you were describing, those four, there's always within every density certain forms. So you were mentioning earlier how you saw certain archangel type beings at one of the densities that you had visited. And so, yeah, that's something that if I need to tie this into something that is already existing, that would make more sense. Have you ever heard of angelology, the different classifications of angels?
Yeah.
You know how at one point, everyone loves to talk nowadays about the seraphim class, because once we found out that the angels in one of the books of the Bible was described as being just a bunch of eyes with wheels and a chariot, they started to say, oh, that's a biblically accurate depiction of an angel. No, that is just the highest class. Angels in the Bible are also depicted as being normal looking men, to the point where one of the people don't even know they're speaking to an angel. They have no idea. So the same with angelology. There's different systems and different hierarchies of what we're considering now the citizens of certain densities. We can call them a ranking or hierarchies of angelic beings. And so they've been described in the Bible as either being like an ordinary guy, just look no different than anyone else, or they've been described as having wings, or they've been described in different ways, because we're talking about different citizens of specific densities. And so using now the popular one of the seraphim, where they're seeing a bunch of different eyes all over the wheels with the wings, that's at a certain point the forms we're saying, like, is that an angel, is that this, or is that I just call them at that point different citizens of light beings, depending on what density that they're occupying. Just light beings.
Okay.
You can call them angelic beings, though.
But there is a lot of confusion about some of the, let's say, archangels, because I don't know, what was her name? I forgot. Ashayana Dean, I think, you know.
I get her name comes up in my comment sections of my videos quite a lot.
Yeah, she says, like, for example, she thinks that Metatron is hijacked and used to be positive, now is very dangerous. I something about Michael as well. And I had interactions with Michael, and also I was learning quite a lot about Metatron, and that's conflicts. That created a lot of conflict, because I'm hearing a lot of people say these things, and someone I kind of trust was, well, when I was mentioning about like scanning the being, so they would scan apparently Gabriel, and they said it was a reptilian who would create some kind of device around him that emanates light. And apparently that's like hijacked, and when people pray and stuff like that, they just suck the prayers or something. So I got really confused with a lot of this stuff. What do you think about like some of these guys I mentioned? And what do you think about teachings of Ashayana?
I don't know her teachings specifically, but I do agree with a lot of what you said, but I'll explain why. First, we have to know who Metatron is, because Metatron is a very interesting character. I like that being, and I'm not fond of the angels, the class of angels that we access and that we revere. I am actually not talking about when I'm talking about these higher density beings. Usually we're dealing with, when the angels we speak of archons that are showing their positive form, because in this layer of reality we're in, we split into duality, what I call the false light. So if there is a being that we're seeing that has a sword and is battling these negative demons, what we're seeing is actually that they also have the split opposite as well. They have an archonic form as well. So I believe that everything within the false light that's battling one another, you're an angel battling a demon, that's all false light. That's not what I'm talking about when I talk about those higher density light beings, or what you would call angelic beings. I had to even heal my connection with the term angel, because at one point I only saw them as being the positive form of archon, that duality of the false light. But when it comes to Michael and Metatron specifically, I do agree somewhat with her. The Metatronic reversals in sacred geometry I have an issue with. But to stick to the Michael thing first, we have to know where Metatron came into existence in our collective mind. Metatron came into our existence as a peripheral character, as Enoch, that got a spin-off series. was not a central key character, but became, how we watch those Star Wars videos and we see now that they're making more and more and more movies about one of those peripheral characters. You go like, let's hone in on that person's life, and now let's go see how, and that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's how Metatron started off. It started off as Enoch and as like a side character, not maybe a backdrop, not maybe an NPC, but it started off as like a non-important role that then started getting more attention, and then spun into, literally evolved into Metatron. If we're looking at Jewish mysticism, which is what all Christianity comes from Judaism, Metatron got promoted from Enoch into Metatron. And then from there, Michael and Metatron became so entangled together that they were actually being called the same attributes, the same characteristics at some point. And the only thing that was really different about them was the fact that Metatron was always known, no matter how high of a level of status Metatron carried, Metatron was always known as being new, as being the youthful, as being the fresh one, because of how it was so well documented that this character had ascended from Enoch into Metatron. So that was really the only difference between Metatron and Michael. It was the fact that Metatron was known for being like holding a very high position, very powerful position, but being new. But all of that, whether it's Michael, Metatron, all those different veins, I have seen very positive. I've connected through my own gnosis, my own experiences with very positive aspects of Metatron. And at the same time, I do not feel like either of those figures, no matter how much I respect them, them. But no matter how much I respect them, I do not see that part of angelology. I do not see those characters as being as profound and as exalted as we connect with them in this age. Does this make sense?
Yeah, for me, I had quite a lot of interactions, which, that's why I became so much interested. And one time, for example, because like I said, I was doing a lot of work with psychedelics, for me, they would be like amplifiers of my own abilities, where I could jump into like the higher self or past lives and things like that. And very often I would ask a lot of questions and I would just instantly see like lifetimes or get answers and things like that. So one time, and I was always drawn to like archangels, and I had a lot of interactions. Like one time I got myself in some contract where I had an implant. Michael removed that, things like that. One time I asked about my most recent incarnation, and I'm just saying what I was shown. I'm not saying I believe that, but it became interesting to me. So I heard ninth density, and I'm like, ninth density, are there any beings in ninth density? And I'm like thinking archangels, and I was shown a being that looked like some old guy. This was obviously symbolic, like a sage or someone, and there was a symbol behind him, and I couldn't see the symbol. So I started looking at the symbol, and it was a symbol of Metatron. So I was explained in that session that apparently my previous incarnation was a collective of Metatron, and I was explained that we are on Earth as a collective. And then I was explained about some other people one guy I met, who apparently was a part of the collective as well. And he was very interesting as well, this guy. So, and it's funny because I picked the symbol of Metatron one time on a big project I was working on, which was like my lifetime project. But I didn't finish. It was a documentary about all these things. So I'm just saying, but because I had a lot of these interactions, this topic became really interesting to me, and it's sometimes not a lot of information. And another thing about it, like if you look at Enoch, apparently what's happened was that when he became Metatron, he was the only archangel that could actually incarnate on Earth. So this is the difference between like Michael or any other archangels, apparently. Yeah, I don't know. This is just what I was experiencing.
I find Metatron to be the most reliable out of the angels that we know the most in this age. But I view also there being such a false light overlaying this reality that, like, for instance, who's to say that you and I haven't been in the role of Michael? The interesting thing about being in the human form is that the human form is one that shows we are ready to ascend our consciousness. A lot of times we go, oh, Michael's the best. Oh, being Syrian, like Sirius, the planet, or being Pleiadian. And I love Pleiadians. We think that all of these other things, whether they're from old age biblical contexts that have carried over into the new age, or even the things that we're aware of now, are the peak. But really, once we're done playing the right hand of God, once we're done playing certain themes out, we come into the human experience to shed them, to truly ascend them. So that's what I find also very pivotal in the false light. I find the false light needing there to be Yahweh. And then from there, all of the math is organized around Yahweh. That is already false. The fact that Yahweh is God. And then from there you have, well, Michael's the right-hand man. Oh, well, from there, Metatron becomes the being that can incarnate into human form from that angelology of Yahweh. Do you see all these different things that come from that one distortion of Yahweh as God? That's the false light.
Yeah, I mean, I heard also these types of things that Yahweh is just some negative being, really.
Good and bad, because it's the false light. So it has good aspects that we would call God, or the things that we attribute to the positive actions of God, but also Yahweh's that split as well as God and the devil.
Yeah. What about Jesus? So I think in one of your videos you said something about like being like a false Jesus or something, like two types of Jesuses or something. But again, like, so years ago I was at this festival. I was like, I don't know, 15 years ago or something, and when I was like exploring a lot of these things, and there were these guys praying to Jesus, and they were like, "Oh, you want us to pray to Jesus for you?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And they asked, "What do you want, or what do you need?" And I said, "I want to know the truth." So they prayed, and after that, I went to do some meditation or something, and I felt this love presence around me. So I felt like maybe that was because these guys prayed to Jesus a couple of minutes ago. So I had always like this idea that Jesus is like the real deal. Maybe, it's like positive being, whatever. So there was a period where I started praying to Jesus, and in 2019, I prayed to Jesus, and I asked for help with business. I never asked for anything material, but that time I prayed, and I had a vision of a contract. When I prayed to Jesus, and I asked for something like that. So I was like, why would Jesus give me a contract? It was like a contract appeared in my signature. And over the next couple of days or weeks, my business started moving. I got some partnership that I really wanted for many months or many years and things like that. But at the same time, I always get insights when something's wrong in dreams from my guides, and started showing me that I got myself in some trouble with some negative beings. So, and at the same time, I started feeling this heavy energy on the right side of my back. It wasn't the first time. So I started thinking, okay, I knew what's happened because it happened before. I got myself in some kind of contract, probably with some negative beings or something that pretended to be Jesus or whatever. And I had this dream where I got rescued by angel. Let's say this massive angel came and rescued me. And the next day, I started researching on YouTube how to remove karmic contracts, and I found a guided meditation by a guy called Wolfgang, who I learned that we know each other from past lives. And in that guided meditation, you ask Archangel Michael to remove contracts or cancel contracts. So the day before that, I had this dream where this massive angel came and saved me. The next day, I found this meditation, and I've done the meditation, and this energy on my back disappeared. And I had a vision of a massive scar going, like almost taking half of my back. So what I understood from it was that, I was praying to Jesus. It wasn't Jesus, or someone hijacked the prayer or whatever. I got installed an implant on my back, and then it was removed because maybe the contract wasn't valid. I thought I'm praying to Jesus with someone else. I don't know. What do you think about Jesus overall? Because it's such a confusing topic to me. Like, some people say that he was like completely orchestrated figure. So people pray, and then the prayers are hijacked. I don't know. What do you think?
I like Jesus as the archetype. Jesus is a very, very, very powerful archetype. And we see this today. We see everyone values love through the isn't that beautiful that no matter how far away we stray from unity consciousness, from enlightenment, that even the farthest away of people who are stuck in separation consciousness almost love Jesus the most. You know, it wasn't some like WWF bodybuilder who said like kick ass. We love this person who we turned white, who looked, you know, medium build, didn't look overly weak, but wasn't strong by any means of the way that it's depicted. Talked about love, but didn't talk about love so much that it made you have to completely be selfless. And yet Jesus, who is really a logos. So really all those things I'm talking about are really attributes, they're characteristics of a logos. No matter how far we stray from an enlightened state of oneness, we still, because it's so deeply the truth that's in our unconscious, we still value and we still respect and admire and even worship this figure that's representing the logos, that's embodying the logos. That's how much you know that there is truth there. So for me, I love Jesus because Jesus is the powerful embodiment of the logos, which is just unity consciousness. I mean, more than that, but to keep things very simple about what Jesus is, it's Jesus is the middle way. So in Christianity, there's a high emphasis on Jesus, but there's always been something to hold that space of being the representation of the middle way. Something that embodies the logos, meaning the natural laws, sunyata dharma of do no harm, but take no shit. This is how you get out of the matrix. This is how you ascend. This is how you ascend from base consciousness into unity consciousness. That's what I'm calling the logos. So for me, I don't get so hung up on the history because, yeah, I see a timeline where Jesus was a made-up figure and that there was so many different enlightened individuals. We would call them in this age light workers. There were so many different light workers, but that they consolidated them. They turned them into one character. And this composite character got named Jesus. And then it was like, see, look what happened. And the story was created around this. Yeah, I see that timeline. But also to me, I'm fine with there being a higher density starseed that incarnated that was called Yeshua, because that would have been the name Yeshua, and who lived out a high-level mystic dharma, who lived out a dharma, and that got really honed in on centralized as a story, meaning there was probably other high-level mystics or other higher density beings doing things, but that for whatever reason, the powers that were, they really get served. Their agendas really get served if we just cut everything and turn it into this one character and call him Jesus. And we just make everybody focus upon the importance of this one character. So for me, I don't get lost in the sauce. I don't get lost in all the different ways that could have happened. What the truth is of Yeshua. Instead, I just look at Yeshua as that logos, that middle way principle embodied. And from that, I view him as a colleague, and I have much respect for the spiritual archetype, the being that we know as Yeshua.
So do you think that what happened in my case, maybe I called Jesus, but I should have called Joshua, and someone decided to hijack the prayer because it wasn't exactly directed or something? Or
well,
maybe...
it depends on how we pray. So if we're praying from a state of separation consciousness, that's not as powerful. as praying from a state of unity consciousness. So if we're praying from unity consciousness, we know that Jesus is within. We know that Yeshua is the awakened heart center. But if a being is praying from so much separation, right? Pray from separation, you attract separation. You're going to probably attract some sort of archonic being that has no problem availing themselves as Yeshua in order to fulfill whatever your request was, so long as there is the time that they collect on that request. So it depends on how we pray.
Yeah, definitely. The thing was that was the first time I asked for something selfish, let's say, like material. And for me, it was also an experience how, like I described before, I think that we have levels of archangels that they're like management, like you have police and court and firefighters and stuff like that. So because I wanted Jesus or something, and maybe some archonic or someone decided to take advantage of my free will request, the contract wasn't valid because, I wanted Jesus. It wasn't like a real contract. So there was a trick or manipulation of the free will here. And that's why someone like Michael could step in and remove the contract and remove the implant. That's kind of what I think happened. I don't know.
I don't even play at that level, because if I have to call in Michael for something, that means I'm at a certain level of reality where there is a Michael, there's an archon or a demon, and I don't play at that level of reality. So even though many people, even my clients, they love Michael. So many of my clients pray to Michael. I don't tell them to stop. I don't even say anything. Because if they're in resonance with Michael, it's great. I don't judge that. But me, I don't even operate at that level of calling in Michael for something, because calling in Michael for something is just going to attract that thing back if we're still at that level of reality.
Yeah, no, this is earlier, when because I had quite a lot of these experiences with him. But these days, I don't pray to anything more than just my higher self, let's say.
Yeah, and I didn't mean that in like a mean way. I just meant how I view that. But yeah, even if you did pray to Michael, I wouldn't care.
But do you think, so let's say, if someone decides to pray, let's say, to the source versus the higher self, is there a difference?
Yeah. Because the higher self, at least for me, when I'm talking about the higher self, I'm talking about something specific. Because if I wasn't talking about the higher self, I wouldn't use that term. I would say source, or I would say the oversoul, or I would say a guide. If I'm saying higher self, it means something that's different from another meaning. So what was the question?
Is there a difference when you pray to the source or the higher self? Because sometimes, I remember a long time ago, I also grew up in Catholic background. So I had this programming of praying to God, And I remember more than 10 years ago, I met my twin flame and we separated. And I was heartbroken. So I prayed to God to get her back, let's say. And what happened was that she's very psychic. So she said that suddenly, a being appeared that looked like me, but me 20 years older. And he was helping her out, with different things. She was doing her exams for a method called life alignment, which became like her modality. So one time we sat down and I started asking, call this guy who looks like me, and I'm going to be asking questions, who is that guy? And, I asked, what's the relationship between you and me? And he morphed his face, which was like me 20 years older, into my face, and showing me that, that's me, basically. So it was my relationship with my higher self, because he appeared in this form for someone like her who is a psychic. And I believe what happened was that because I prayed to God or source, let's say, to get her back, my higher self stepped in because he started connecting us. And, and kind of started our relationship because she's my twin flame. So he's also her guide. And, so I felt like, okay, I prayed to God, but I got higher self. So was it like the higher self, the source decides let's give him higher self to work with or whatever? That's why I'm kind of thinking, is there a difference between calling source or higher self?
So the higher self is source wearing a Halloween mask.
Okay.
Because remember how you were talking earlier about the fractal nature of reality, how it goes lower and lower and lower? The higher self is source. But if we want to get really technical, the higher self is source, but with more of a own unique intrinsic nature, own unique personality. And I don't mean the conditioned persona. I don't mean a conditioned personality. I mean the personality of spirit, which is just the intrinsic attributes. So once we start going down and fractalizing, we start becoming more unique and more personable to its own journeys. And so the higher self still is source. It's just wearing a Halloween costume and mask. And so, in that way that you described, calling for God or calling for source would still invoke the higher self.
Yeah, I like to sometimes use this analogy as you have sun, and sun emanates sun rays, and so sun is like the source, sun ray is higher self, and then the sun ray is made of photons. Photons are your incarnations. So it's kind of like all these things are one thing, but you can see the forms and separation.
It always creates the structure of a trinity. And why, how you used it as a proton, a neutron, and an electron? That's the superconscious, the subconscious, and the conscious. You have the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, but all of those come from the first Trinity, which is consciousness. So you have love, light, which are the different aspects of consciousness. I mean, I could go on and on and on, so I'll stop there. But basically, it is always a trinity.
Yeah, that's kind of how I see it. That's why I see it as 12, because you have 4, 4, 4, 4 being like a full season, four seasons, let's say. And when you have 8, it even looks like infinity, which is like two polar opposites. Where you have, like even when you go through your life cycle, you keep growing and then you decay, right? So this is kind of like polar opposite as well.
And you also have future, present, and past.
Yeah,
and then you have passive, active, and neutral.
Yeah.
In mysticism, that's the way the Trinity is depicted. It's as the passive force, the active force, and the neutral force.
Okay. So I think we have time for one more question, and I wanted to ask you, what do you think about karma, in this sense that some people say you don't have to repay karma at all? I have sometimes, like, let's say you think about someone like Hitler or some really service to self entity, and suddenly they decide to change polarity. They decide to switch to the light. do you think they don't have to repay karma or something? Do you think it would be so easy? What do you think about it? Do you have to repay some karma, or maybe there are some other methods where you don't have to do it? Let's say for a being that is extremely polarized as service to self.
So when you are in unity consciousness, now I'm not going to go over how evil Hitler was, because that's its own branch. I've seen documentaries of all natures about Hitler. And so let's just say one thing. We can agree that Hitler wasn't in unity consciousness. Hitler was in separation consciousness. So we can just agree on that. His actions were based off of separation consciousness. If you're coming from unity consciousness, one, you have already started dissolving and clearing your karma. Now, from that point on, and it becomes how much you balance your karma. If you balance your karma to a certain degree, you enter a threshold called dharma, called the open present moment. And that will give you, it's not literal, but I'm doing the best I can with human words, so bear with me. That will give what's called grace. That will give what's called pardon. So you don't have to clear everything. It will shift in the metaphysical realm, in the quantum realm, into it was already all cleaned up. At that point, you can choose that you do not have to do anything because of karma, and that there is no karmic debt. So you're not even coming from that level of consciousness at this concept from the place of I've cleared all of it, because you're coming from I don't have any. There's a difference between saying I've cleared all of mine, which kept a tally, versus saying I don't have any. Now,
okay, so
that level of reality is different from if you're in separation consciousness. Your actions created a whole bunch of cause and effect, into such a state of ignorance that now it provoked evil. That's the fruits of ignorance. When you become so ignorant, you start accidentally, even if you have the best intentions, you start accidentally creating evil. That's a different space. Now it's not so easy to just say, all of my karma has been balanced and pardoned. Do you see?
But so you think that they have to repay some of the karma balance, which is kind of repay like by doing the opposite, let's say?
Well, you just don't get to ascend. Put it that way. You have to come back in body, or you graduated, because I'm not using Hitler now as the example anymore. I'm just using evil incarnate. You can graduate from evil in human form into, as we talked about earlier, the progression of that, which would be reptilian or Nordic. There's all these different gray, like there's so many different forms of negative hyperdensity beings or hyperdimensional beings.
Yeah.
But let's just not even go there. Let's just say one thing, and that's, you don't just get to have your karma completely paid off. You would at the very least have to balance those deeds. And that would take more lifetimes, depending on how much you needed to balance those deeds and how many lessons. When I say balance those deeds, I don't mean that if you stole 5 cents from somebody that you have to go balance it by giving 5 cents. When I'm talking about balancing those deeds, I'm talking about learning the equivalent exchange of those lessons, of that infliction, of that cause and effect. So cause and effect would be the lessons. You did this action, which created a cause. It created this effect. That impact would be what you would need to learn in the form of lessons. And that's also in alchemy called the law of equivalent exchange.
So basically you would have to feel what it is like when someone stole from you 5 cents, for example, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that would mean that if the being is extremely polarized, like let's say Genghis Khan or Hitler or someone, they would have way more work to balance it out, right? More lifetimes than someone who is like 1% of what they have done or something like that, right?
Yeah, but because there's so much free will involved, things can be accelerated or things can be decelerated. Yeah, because we also look at things, let's look at things now from Eastern mysticism. Eastern mysticism does not judge a person's circumstance by their whole story. The very opposite. They sometimes judge or discern that if a being is the most oppressed, sometimes that is actually a person who has the perfect conditions for liberation. So I'm only using that as an example. I'm not calling those figures we were talking about enlightened or close to liberation. But what I'm showing is the fact that free will does a lot with our ability for whatever we have to balance, for whatever situations or circumstances we are magnetized towards, that we are for, that we are magnetized in order to balance our karma. The worst situation can also potentially be the quickest way to liberation. So it depends if those body, mind, spirits who were so negatively polarized, either one, they could have graduated into the higher form of that negative pathway of service to self, or they could be balancing their karma, but because their situations karmically are so harsh, that might not be a bad thing. That might be quicker learning. It's up to the person always.
Yeah. So, for example, my cousin who is working for me, let's say, he had very challenging life, addiction issues. His father would beat him up, like really a lot of drama, a lot of depression, things like that. And one time he had a near-death experience where he overdosed some drugs. He mixed 2 drugs that he apparently shouldn't. What happened was that he left the body. He said he found himself in this kind of dark space where it was like this energetic wind, and he's hearing a voice speaking to him, which we think it was his higher self. He said it was like very intelligent, and said, you overdosed, you're about to die, your brain is overheating. Do you want to stay or do you want to leave? And he was like, I think I've had enough, because he had such a challenging life. So he thought like, maybe I'm gonna leave. And in that moment when he made this decision, like he was shown his whole life instantly. Like, so he said he could see everything, including like the whole plan of his life, including that near-death experience. And then there were a couple of options of exits as well. And the voice said, if you're going to leave, you still have some things to finish. You will have to repeat them in your next incarnation. So then he said, okay, in this case, I'm going to stay. So when he decided to stay, this whole soul plan was wiped out. Like he said, he doesn't remember almost anything, but at that moment, he was shown everything. So the voice said, okay, before you're going to come back to your body, you still have a couple of moments left. Is there anything you want to know? And he said, okay, I want to know why my life looks the way it looks. Like it's full of suffering. I have all these challenges, all these issues. And in that moment, he saw a scene where he was a massive reptilian standing in front of a spaceship, and there was some other being below him, and he kind of felt like the fear of this being and stuff like that. So the being started talking about love, and he was like, what is love? I would like to experience what is love. So it seems like what happened was that the higher self showed him a puzzle where he made the decision to go to the light because he became interested in that. And in some other session, like with psychedelic, he was shown like one of his previous lifetimes where he was like a prostitute, or was like an alcoholic, was abused all the time and things like that. So we started thinking like maybe this is like his repayments, let's say what you were saying, or balancing. Because even now, like what he's doing, he's helping me out with my work, which means that, he's trying to contribute to the positive side, but he still is getting enough of conditions to like do the work, but still having a lot of trouble. So I don't know. I thought I'm gonna share.
That's beautiful and very fascinating and interesting. And yeah, pathways dead end. They absolutely dead end. So what you'll see beings or races that have gone so far down service to self end up doing is either one, this is the main thing, unfortunately, is they're doubling down. So they become even more aggressive for their food sources rather than going, well, maybe I need to turn back. I reached a dead end. I've become as selfish, shall we say, service to self. I've played this pathway out to its fullest, and I've reached a dead end. They typically have doubled down, but when you don't double down, you turn around. When you turn around, that pathway, that walk home, shall we say, it's a walk home.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes I compare it to someone who is an alcoholic, and what's easier for this person? If someone is drinking like for many years every day, what makes sense is to live in illusion on day-to-day basis, because you can drink and you feel okay. But if you decide to get clean, that means you're gonna have to go through rehabilitation, withdrawal symptoms that might be very, very painful for many months, let's say. So it's easier to continue on a day-to-day basis and live in illusion. I feel like it's a little bit like that with some of these beings that are so polarized that it's easier for them just to continue.
It's easier for them to continue, but at the same time, it's very sloppy. So it helps us awaken. It's not sophisticated anymore. A lot of people go, oh, you got to watch out. This is high level. It's not. It's quite messy. It's a mess, because imagine that analogy that you just used of someone drunk. That's perfect for looking at how desperate you become. Do you think you get down that pathway and become all jazz? No, you become quite starved. You become quite desperate. You become quite aggressive. Here's the giveaway. Service to self pathway can only see what they want to see. They cannot see anything else. That's one of the things I learned from that mystic cult I was telling you about, why I can't truly be mad at that experience. I learned too much richness to really walk away from that as saying, oh, I wish I never did that. One of the things I learned from that was service to self is ruled 1000% by hubris. You know the Greek term hubris for the arrogance of a consciousness? They're hubris incarnate. They can only see what they want to see. That's what makes well-intended, very innocent, spiritual awakening people actually a match to service to self. It's only being able to see what you want to see. But anyways, so when you go down that path that whole way, it helps us awaken. things around us look quite dumb and obvious. So a lot of the manipulations that are going on right now, they're not quite sophisticated.
Yeah, and they're so afraid and insecure because they know if people are going to wake up or change, their food is gone, so they're going to starve and they're going to go somewhere else. So that's why they try to block in any way, shape, or form, starseeds or our awakening and things like that. All right. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we're going to finish?
The last note I would say is just to wrap up that point, because I feel like it was a very strong point that we made. So I want to just add to that. It would be that, I want to really stress the point that the things that we're seeing around us, I want people to start shifting their perception instead of seeing them as, oh, they're so powerful. Oh, they're so high level, sophisticated. I want that narrative shifted, because that's the truth. The truth is, this isn't sophisticated. This isn't so almighty, all powerful, inevitable. This is coming from starved hunters. Now, if it was just coming from hunters, okay, man, they might be great hunters. This is coming from hunters, but they're starved and desperate. So I want that to be really honed in on.
Yeah, and you have always power over everything, right? Because nothing can be influencing you without your free will, right?
Yeah, and we just need more people to embody true unity, consciousness, and nuance so that it can help model and wake up to other people and telepathically even help other individuals arise to that level of awareness and discernment. So you and I just having this conversation right now about that service to self pathway and what that looks like is actually shifting the morphic resonance field as we speak, so that other people are now going, oh, now I get why she says the powers that were. Now I don't fear them as much. Now they're not that man, I used to think they were powerful and they were this and that. They are starved. They are weak, vampiric hunters at this point.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Thank you, Sarah, for joining me today. And thank you to everyone who was watching. And hope we're going to continue with another episode at some point in the future with different questions and different topics.
Thank you.
Thank you.